All right, well, that was probably enough to fill an entire episode, but we still need to talk about the other elephant in the room, which is Facebook was getting lonely. And they said, everyone's making these really cool audio apps. People are listening to podcasts. People are starting rooms, little clubs. We want in on some of that action. So they just came out with a big announcement talking about how they're getting into the audio game. So Albin, what has been the big takeaway from the Facebook announcements, especially as we're just trying to figure out how all these big players are starting to move forward in the audio space?
Listen, Travis, it's not that Mark Zuckerberg and everybody else on Facebook was getting lonely. There's more than enough people on there. What happened was they're like, whatever $1 trillion valuation got lonely when it saw $4 billion in value that people are now thinking that Clubhouse is worth. And they saw that valuation and they went, that sounds really interesting. What if we got some of that action? And it feels like Facebook has got a lot of cool ideas and they announced them all very quickly. And they feel they're very much in that idea stage.
You're giving them ideas? Their ideas are, hey, this company started and it's pretty cool. Let's copy that.
Let's rip it off.
And they're getting idea credit for that.
I mean, what have they done over the last 5 years where they're like, hey, let's buy Snapchat. They're like, oh, you can't. All right, we now have a Snapchat we have stories. They're like, ooh, this TikTok thing's cool. Add that to Instagram. And so they're definitely getting more comfortable with being heavily inspired by other apps. And so they made this announcement that they were heavily inspired by Clubhouse, heavily inspired by Anchor, being able to create podcasts on your phone. They were heavily inspired by Auphonic and Magic Mastering, that you can clean up audio. They were heavily inspired by the visual soundbite and really like Headliner and Wave have done in making like these shareable clips that you can share everywhere. I don't think they actually logged into Buzzsprout and were at all worried about us, but definitely those four companies, they pretty much announced we are going to build clones of all of these and we're going to figure out along the way how it fits into Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the big one is, at least for like our podcasters, is the fact that Facebook will now have some kind of native audio playing capability for podcast episodes. We don't know how it's going to work. We don't know if you're going to be able to link your RSS feed to like a Facebook page and how it pull in the episodes automatically, or if you're going to have to upload them separately and, manage everything within Facebook itself. We still don't know. But what we do know is that in sometime later this year, it will be easier for people to listen to your podcast on Facebook, which should be a good thing, right? That should actually make social media marketing a little bit more effective.
I don't know. And I don't want to just poo-poo this idea because I gotta hope they learned something from when they did this before. But it was like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we were pushing podcast episodes to Facebook. They just didn't work at all. And like, not just didn't work a little, like they didn't work at all. And the reason that they pulled them out, I think, is because they didn't work at all. Like in hindsight, it seems obvious, but like what Facebook is really good at is giving you a news feed full of things that they think you're going to find interesting, and they do a pretty good job of that.
Baby
and you just kind of
photos and
scroll
political arguments.
Yeah, you just scroll through it. And so when you'd scroll past a podcast episode and you'd hit play and it would start playing a 45-minute podcast episode, and you then kept scrolling, it was like playing in the background, and then you came to a video, and then that video wanted to play, and so the podcast had to stop, and then you like, it just didn't work. Like it was different. And I only am on Facebook for 5 minutes while I'm like, waiting for my Starbucks order to pick up my kids in car line, or because I just can't go to sleep. And it was just the wrong media at the wrong time. Right. Yeah. And so now they're trying to figure out, how do we do this right? And I think what they're trying to do is they're saying, hey, we tried podcasts before, it didn't work, but you know what? Podcasts are getting really big. We've got to try it again. I don't know how they're going to approach it differently this time. I just hope it is different, because the way that they tried it last time was a massive failure.
So can I put on my Facebook product manager hat for a second and kind of guess where this will go?
Sure. Why not?
It's not going to work in the feed. Kevin's right. I mean, you're waiting there for 5 minutes and you're doing something because you are bored and you want a stimulating political argument, or you want like some funny pictures to pop up and you just scroll through and you see it. That works. But one of the things we know is like videos in the feed, 85% of them are played without audio. And they're played without audio because your eyes are bored. You want something for your eyes to catch you, and you don't really want to turn on the sound when you're in the, where you are out in public. We all see those people who blast the sound out of their phone. You're like, all right, like there's other people in this bus. So I don't think that audio works in the feed, but what they ended up doing with video, where it's in this separate tab where you can go through and actually watch long form video content, that's catching on. And it's not something I use regularly, but I every once in a while see like, man, these things are getting millions and millions of plays. Well, I think they've got to have podcasts in its own separate area. And maybe the Clubhouse clone ends up being more similar to like a Facebook Live, just where you don't have to be on camera if you don't want to be. And as I think about like, it's kind of got to be in its own tab. Maybe we get our own podcast player, or maybe it's just an audio player where you can play rooms that happened in the past, but you can also play live Clubhouse style rooms, and you can play podcasts. Maybe they don't even differentiate between those audio content types. Maybe there's ways to subscribe, follow shows, whatever. But man, does it get exciting when I think about Facebook groups. Facebook made this huge push into groups a few years ago, and now everybody has self-selected into, hey, I'm really into anime, or I'm really into podcasting, like our Buzzsprout Facebook group. And wouldn't it be cool if you're in the group and you say, hey, let's start a Facebook Clubhouse room right now for the group. Everyone in the group is able to join. It's just private to this group. Let's chat. You could see that working. You could see having a podcast associated with the room, that now all those episodes are available. All episodes of Buzzcast could be available in a Facebook group. As soon as you start grouping, you start working with audio in these groups, because podcasts are niche content. It's focused on something you are interested in. And Facebook groups are doing that same thing, building a community around a particular interest. Well, that actually aligns quite a bit. And so it's still a little bit harder for me to get past the people are used to pulling open that Facebook app automatically and, flipping through stuff for a couple minutes. But there are particular areas in Facebook where you're going for specific reasons. You want to connect and reach out to people who have something in common with you. Kind of nice to be able to also click a podcast, turn off the screen, and maybe you're not on Facebook while you're driving. Maybe you're just listening to Facebook podcasts while you're driving. Maybe auto crashes will go down. So maybe we will improve people looking at cell phones with this rollout. But it kind of makes me a little bit excited that we could introduce a ton of new people to podcasting. Facebook really has this global reach that's beyond any other website or platform. And we really in the US forget sometimes how much of the world, their experience of the internet is mediated by Facebook. And the minute that Facebook says, hey, there's these podcast things in here, there's 43% of American adults who've never listened to a podcast. Think how many more people in countries that have not been more exposed to podcasting. US is the most podcast saturated. The rest of the world, we're about to introduce a ton of people to podcasts if Facebook ends up rolling out some of this stuff.
I thought it was kind of telling that all of the screenshots that Facebook showed when they're talking about their podcast stuff, when you click on the podcast tab, they were all like video podcasts, which makes me like, again, I'm like, do you really get what's going on in the podcasting world? Video podcasts, cool thing, but kind of different than what's kind of blowing up in the podcast world, right? Like a lot of great people doing video podcasts on YouTube and stuff, but the stuff that's being distributed everywhere. And when people say, have you heard this new podcast? They're usually talking about, an audio only version that's distributed everywhere. Right. And so I'm hoping that they just used those images because they looked prettier for the screenshots. And I'm hoping they're actually trying to figure out solutions for audio first podcasts. But yeah, more listeners, never a bad thing. We'll see.
Yeah.
Details are still fuzzy.
Man, does this take me back to, if you are a content creator right now, especially in the podcasting world, the last few days, the last year have been incredibly validating. We saw Clubhouse really take off. We've seen Twitter launch Twitter Spaces. We're going to see, who knows, Microsoft Excel is going to launch their own audio-only Excel listening. I don't know what. Everybody's getting into it. Facebook, Spotify, Apple, everybody's more interested in this space now. And I really hope the winners of all of this are going to be the content creators, all of you listening to this podcast, because you were here before everybody realized how cool it was, before the tech giants really got super involved. And now they're getting more involved and they're giving a lot more tools out there. The people that understand this medium, who maybe have been podcasting for a year or more, are going to have a leg up in experimenting with these platforms, figuring out how they work, and hopefully capitalizing on it. The one piece of advice, we always talk about on this show is, when you're experimenting, always have your options open. You don't want to be totally locked into Facebook podcasts, or only do things with Apple Podcast subscriptions, or go Spotify exclusive, unless you're actually getting their big bucks and it's everything you ever wanted. You really want to keep all of that open, because all these platforms are seeing a lot of interest in this area. They're experimenting. And as content creators who have been here well before this excitement kicked off, and we will all be here well after this excitement dies down, we want to make sure that we're retaining control over everything we're doing. And as it blows up, we can ride the wave and then make sure that we are doing well on the other end of this as well. So, just kind of be careful about going all in on a platform, but I love the experimentation that we're going to have, and all the new workflows and just different ways of monetizing and connecting with our audience. There's a ton of stuff changing, and it could be pretty awesome.